A world of clinking crystal and hushed whispers can be a lonely place, especially for someone who can't hear them. For Isabella Davenport, the matriarch of a billion-dollar empire, it was a gilded cage. Tonight, her son, the formidable CEO Adrian Davenport, paraded her through Aria, the city's most exclusive restaurant. But when an ordinary waitress with flour on her worn-out shoes knelt beside her, she didn't offer a menu. She offered a miracle. Her hands began to dance in a silent, forgotten language, and in that moment, the foundations of a dynasty began to crumble and rebuild in a way no one saw coming. The air in Aria was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. It was a place where deals were signed over $500 stakes, and reputations were made or broken with a single glance. For Amelia Rossi, or Mia, as her friends called her, it was just another Tuesday, another 12-hour shift on her feet, another night of smiling through the condescension of the city's elite, all to make rent on her tiny, drafty apartment and send money back home for her younger brother's college tuition. Her uniform, a stark black dress with a crisp white apron, was impeccably clean, but it couldn't hide the weariness in her eyes or the faint pallor of her skin. She moved with an efficiency born of necessity, her steps quiet and deliberate as she navigated the labyrinth of tables. She was a ghost in the machine of luxury present, but unseen her purpose solely to serve. The manager, a severe man named Mr. Dubois, ran the floor like a military operation. Perfection is the minimum standard, Rossi. He'd once told her, his voice clipped. Our clientele does not pay for almost. Tonight the pressure was even higher. A ripple of anticipation had spread through the staff an hour earlier. The Davenports are coming, the hostess had whispered, her eyes wide. Table 7, the corner booth. The Davenports. The name was synonymous with power in the city. Davenport Industries was a titan of technology and finance, a sprawling empire built by Adrian Davenport's grandfather. Adrian, the current CEO, was known for his ruthless business acumen and an icy demeanor that had frozen out competitors and employees alike. He was handsome, in a severe, sculpted way, with dark hair, piercing grey eyes, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was also known for his impatience and his impossibly high standards. When he arrived, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. He strode in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, clinging to his athletic frame, exuding an aura of untouchable authority. On his arm was Victoria Harrington, a socialite whose family fortune was nearly as old as the Davenports. She was a vision in emerald silk, her blonde hair swept into an elaborate chignon, her lips curved in a perpetual, practiced pout. Between them, however, was the figure who truly drew Mia's attention, Isabella Davenport. She was an older woman, perhaps in her late 60s, with a cascade of elegant silver hair and features that were still strikingly beautiful, despite the lines of age. But there was a fragility about her, a profound sense of isolation in her soft blue eyes. She moved with a quiet grace, but she seemed disconnected from the world around her, a beautiful silent ship in her son's powerful wake. Mia knew why. It was a well-known, if rarely spoken of fact in high society. Isabella Davenport was profoundly deaf. She had lost her hearing to a fever in her late 20s. Mia was assigned to their section. Her stomach tightened into a knot. She had served difficult customers, arrogant customers, and demanding customers. The Davenports promised to be all three. "Good evening," Mia said, her voice calm and professional, as she approached the table, a heavy water pitcher in hand. "Welcome to Aria." Adrian didn't even look at her. He was already scanning the wine list, his expression one of intense concentration, as if it were a corporate merger document. Victoria, however, gave Mia a slow, deliberate once-over, her gaze lingering on Mia's slightly scuffed but polished shoes. A faint, dismissive sneer touched her lips before she turned away. It was Isabella who acknowledged her. She offered a small, hesitant smile. Her eyes were kind, but they held a deep, swimming sadness. Mia felt an unexpected pang of empathy. She knew that look. It was the look of someone straining to connect across an impossible divide. "We'll start with the 98 Chateau Margaux," Adrian said, snapping the wine list shut without glancing up. He pointed a finger at the menu. "My mother will have the seared scallops to start, followed by the Dover sole. Make sure the kitchen is light on the salt." He hadn't consulted his mother. He hadn't even looked at her. He spoke for her around her, as if she were a precious inanimate object to be managed. Isabella's smile faltered, and she looked down at her hands, which were resting perfectly still in her lap. Mia felt a knot of anger tighten in her chest, but she smothered it with practiced professionalism. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice even. "And for you and the lady." As Victoria launched into a complicated order full of substitutions and special requests, Mia couldn't take her eyes off Isabella. She saw the woman's gaze drift towards the dessert menu, her eyes lingering on the description of the raspberry soufflé with lemon thyme cream. A flicker of desire of a simple personal want crossed her face before it was extinguished, replaced by the same placid resignation. She was here. But she wasn't. She was a passenger in her own life, and her son was the one at the helm. Maya knew that silence. She had grown up in it. It was the language of her childhood home, the sound of her parents' love. And watching Isabella Davenport trapped in her soundless world, Mia felt a powerful, dangerous urge to break the rules. The first course arrived. The scallops were presented on a bed of saffron risotto, a work of art on a plate. Mia placed the dish gently in front of Isabella, making sure to catch her eye and offer a warm smile. Isabella returned it, a flicker of genuine appreciation in her gaze. Adrian and Victoria were deep in a conversation about a charity gala, their voices a low, exclusive murmur. They paid no more attention to Isabella than they did to the floral centerpiece. Mia retreated to her station near the kitchen, her mind churning. Her parents, both born deaf, had communicated with a vibrant, expressive beauty that filled their small home with more life than any spoken word could. They had taught her American Sign Language ASL before she could even speak, her hands forming clumsy words long before her tongue. To Mia, silence wasn't an absence. It was a space filled with meaning, emotion, and connection. Watching Adrian treat his mother's deafness as an inconvenience, a problem to be managed with curt orders, felt like a personal insult. She busied herself, polishing cutlery, her movements automatic. Across the dining room, she watched the Davenport table. She saw Isabella take a delicate bite of her scallop, and then pause, her brow furrowing slightly. The woman discreetly dabbed her lips with her napkin and took a sip of water. She tried another bite, and this time Mia saw her expression clearly. It was disappointment. Isabella looked towards her son, her mouth opening slightly as if to speak, but Adrian was laughing at something Victoria had said, his attention entirely consumed. The moment passed. Isabella's shoulders slumped, almost imperceptibly, and she placed her fork down, pushing the nearly full plate away. Mia's heart ached for her. A simple preference, a small desire to have her food prepared a certain way, was being ignored because the bridge of communication had been dismantled not by her deafness, but by her son's assumption. When Mia returned to clear the plates, Adrian's eyes narrowed at his mother's dish. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone sharp, directed at Mia. It held the clear implication that any issue was a failing of the restaurant of the server. Was everything to your liking, Mrs. Davenport? Mia asked deliberately, directing her question to Isabella, speaking clearly and looking directly at her. Isabella, likely an expert lip reader out of necessity, understood. She gave a small, unconvincing shake of her head and a tight smile, clearly not wanting to cause a scene. "It's fine," Adrian snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "She's fine. Just bring the main course." As Mia picked up the plate, her fingers brushed against Isabella's. The older woman's hand was cool. Their eyes met again, and in that fleeting moment, Mia saw a clear, desperate plea. It was a look that said, "I am here. Please see me." It was a look Mia had seen in her own mother's eyes, when a well-meaning but clueless doctor had spoken only to Mia about her mother's health, as if she weren't in the room. It was the casual, soul-crushing dismissal of the hearing world. The main courses were served. Again, Adrian had ordered for his mother. The Dover sole was filleted tableside with theatrical flair by Mr. Dubois himself, a courtesy reserved for the most important guests. But as the meal progressed, the same pattern repeated. Isabella ate a few polite bites and then set her cutlery aside. She looked out the large window overlooking the city lights, her expression distant and melancholic. Victoria, meanwhile, was complaining. "This wine is a bit more acidic than I remember Adrian, and my lamb is closer to medium than medium rare. For these prices you'd expect perfection." "I'll have them bring another bottle," Adrian said immediately, his focus entirely on placating his girlfriend. He signaled for Mia with an impatient flick of his wrist. As Mia approached, she steeled herself. She had a choice. She could continue to be the invisible servant, follow the path of least resistance, and collect her tip. Or she could do something that might very well get her fired. She could build a bridge. It was Isabella who inadvertently gave her the opening. As Mia reached the table, Isabella's hand moved. It was a small, almost unconscious gesture. She subtly tapped her chest, and then made a small circular motion over her stomach, a gesture of discomfort. It wasn't perfect ASL, more of a home sign, but Mia understood it instantly. "My stomach is upset. This is too rich." Mia's breath caught in her throat. The decision was made. Mr. Dubois' warning about perfection echoed in her mind, but it was drowned out by the memory of her father signing, "The only thing that isn't perfect is a world that doesn't listen." She turned her body slightly, creating a subtle screen from the other diners. She ignored Adrian's impatient gaze and Victoria's disdainful glare. She looked directly at Isabella Davenport, took a quiet breath, and let her hands rise. Time seemed to slow down. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clatter of silver, the murmur of conversations, the distant melody of a piano faded into a dull hum in Mia's ears. All her focus was on the elegant, lonely woman sitting in the corner booth. She kept her movements small, respectful, not a performance for the room, but a private question. Her hands moved with a fluid grace she hadn't realized she still possessed a language ingrained in her very being. "Is the food not to your liking?" She signed her expression, gentle and questioning. "Would you prefer something simpler? Perhaps soup or some bread?" The effect was instantaneous and seismic. Isabella Davenport's eyes, which had been clouded with a gentle melancholy, widened in absolute shock. Her perfectly manicured hands, which had been resting in her lap, flew to her mouth, covering a silent gasp. For a moment, she simply stared at Mia, her composure utterly shattered. Then her eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, unadulterated joy and disbelief. It was the look of a person finding an oasis after a lifetime in the desert. Adrian, who had been about to reprimand Mia for her slowness, stopped mid-sentence. His jaw went slack. He stared at Mia's moving hands, then at his mother's face, his brain struggling to process the impossible scene unfolding before him. "What? What are you doing?" He stammered his voice, a low, confused rumble. Victoria recoiled as if Mia had produced a venomous snake. "What on earth is that girl doing? Is she having some kind of fit? How unprofessional." But Mia didn't hear them. She was locked in a silent, powerful exchange with Isabella. Slowly, hesitantly, as if retrieving a skill, long thought lost Isabella's hands rose to answer. Her signing was a little rusty, like a beautiful instrument that hadn't been played in years. But her meaning was crystal clear. You sign." Her fingers trembled slightly, not from age, but from the sheer force of her emotion. Mia smiled, a real radiant smile that reached her eyes. "Yes, I grew up with it. My parents were deaf." A single tear traced a path down Isabella's cheek, and she didn't bother to wipe it away. A lifetime of frustration, of being misunderstood, of having her thoughts and desires, filtered through others, melted away in that one moment of pure, unadulterated communication. Her hands moved more confidently now, a torrent of unspoken thoughts finally breaking free. "The food is lovely, but my stomach is sensitive tonight. I didn't want to cause a fuss. My son, he worries." She glanced at Adrian, and for the first time, Mia saw not just sadness in her eyes, but a deep, protective love. "He tries his best." Isabella signed a complex mix of love and exasperation in her expression. "But he forgets that I still have a voice. You have given it back to me." The entire exchange took less than a minute, but it had irrevocably altered the atmosphere at the table. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with meaning. Adrian Davenport, the man who controlled boardrooms and commanded markets, was utterly powerless. He watched dumbfounded as this quiet, unassuming waitress connected with his mother in a way he hadn't in decades. He saw a light in his mother's eyes he hadn't seen since he was a boy, a vibrant, animated spark that he had unknowingly helped to extinguish. It was a gut-wrenching revelation. "What did she say?" He finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. His question was not for his mother, but for Mia. For the first time that evening, he was looking at her not through her. Mia turned to him, her professional calm restored, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Mrs. Davenport was expressing that the food, while delicious, is a bit too rich for her this evening. She was concerned about worrying you. She would prefer a simple vegetable broth and perhaps some warm bread if the kitchen can accommodate. She relayed the message in simple spoken words, but the translation felt woefully inadequate. It failed to capture the gratitude, the relief, the sheer, unbridled humanity of the conversation that had just taken place. The entire restaurant seemed to have noticed the strange tableau. Diners at nearby tables were staring, whispering behind their hands. Mr. Dubois was striding towards them, his face a thundercloud of fury, ready to fire Mia on the spot for disrupting his perfectly orchestrated dining room. The world was about to come crashing down on her, but in that moment, looking at the tearful, smiling face of Isabella Davenport, Mia felt a sense of rightness so profound that she didn't care. Mr. Dubois arrived at the table just as Adrian was trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. The manager's face was a mask of cold fury. "Miss Rossi," he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "My office, now. I will attend to the Davenports personally." "That won't be necessary, Dubois." Adrian's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. It stopped the manager in his tracks. Adrian hadn't taken his eyes off Mia. The initial shock on his face had been replaced by a complex storm of emotions, confusion, shame, and a flicker of something Mia couldn't quite identify, perhaps grudging respect. He then turned to his mother. For the first time, he truly looked at her, not as a responsibility, but as a person. He saw the happy tears still glistening on her cheeks and the animated light in her eyes. He reached out and tentatively placed his hand on hers. She looked at him and smiled a genuine, radiant smile that made her look 10 years younger. "Get my mother the broth and bread." Adrian ordered Mia, his tone clipped but devoid of its earlier arrogance. Then he looked at Mr. Dubois. "And add a 25% service charge to my bill for the inconvenience you were about to cause your staff member." Mr. Dubois blinked, utterly bewildered. He glanced from Adrian's steel-hard expression to Mia's calm face and back again. Without another word, he gave a stiff, jerky nod and retreated, his authority completely usurped. Victoria, who had been watching the scene with growing horror, finally found her voice. "Adrian, darling, what is going on? This is a spectacle. That girl completely overstepped her bounds. She should be fired for making your mother uncomfortable." Isabella's smile vanished. She looked at Victoria and then at Mia, her expression one of fierce protection. She began signing rapidly to Mia, her movements sharp and indignant. Mia watched, then turned to Adrian. "Mrs. Davenport wishes me to convey that she has not been made uncomfortable," Mia said, her voice clear and steady. "On the contrary, she says this is the first time she has felt truly heard in a restaurant in over 20 years. She also says," Mia paused, choosing her words carefully, "that my actions were not an overstep, but an act of kindness." The words landed like stones in the silent space between them. Victoria's face flushed a blotchy, furious red. She had been publicly contradicted, and by proxy by a waitress. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Thank you, Miss Rossi, is it?" "Yes, sir. Amelia Rossi." "Amelia." He repeated the name, sounding foreign on his tongue. "Please see to my mother's order." As Mia walked away, she felt the eyes of the entire restaurant on her. Her legs felt unsteady, and her mind was racing. She had expected to be unemployed by now. Instead, she had been defended by one of the most powerful men in the city. When she returned with a steaming, fragrant bowl of vegetable broth and a basket of warm, crusty bread, Isabella greeted her with a look of such profound gratitude that it made Mia's own eyes well up. The rest of the meal was a surreal experience. Adrian was quiet and contemplative. Victoria was sullen and silent, shooting daggers at Mia whenever she approached. The real change was Isabella. She ate her simple meal with relish, and she and Mia continued to have small, silent conversations whenever Mia was at the table. They spoke of simple things. Isabella asked about Mia's parents. Mia learned that Isabella had once loved to paint. They were small connections, tiny threads, weaving a bond in the space of a few minutes. When the time came for them to leave, Adrian handled the bill. As he stood, he paused in front of Mia. He was tall, and she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "My mother is hosting a small charity luncheon at our estate this Saturday," he said, his voice low and formal. I would be grateful if you would attend. Not as a member of staff, as a guest, and as an interpreter for my mother." Mia was stunned into silence. An invitation to the Davenport estate. "You'll be compensated for your time, of course," he added quickly, as if money were the only language he was truly fluent in. "Adrian, you can't be serious," Victoria hissed, grabbing his arm. Inviting the waitress, Adrian gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. His gaze was fixed on Mia. "My mother's happiness is not negotiable, Victoria. Miss Rossi." Before Mia could answer, Isabella stepped forward and touched her arm. She looked at Mia with pleading eyes, then signed a single powerful word. "Please." How could she refuse? It wasn't about the money or the powerful man or the fancy estate. It was about the woman who had been silenced for decades, asking for a voice. "I'll be there," Mia said softly. The Davenport estate was less a house and more a kingdom. A winding gravel driveway, lined with ancient oak trees, led to a majestic stone manor that looked like it had been plucked from the English countryside. The grounds were a masterpiece of landscaping, with sprawling lawns, intricate rose gardens, and a crystalline pond that reflected the clear blue sky. It was a world away from Mia's cramped apartment with its peeling paint and rattling windows. She had spent 2 days' worth of tips on a simple but elegant navy blue dress from a second-hand boutique. As she approached the grand entrance, she felt a familiar wave of intimidation. This was their world, not hers. But then she remembered the look in Isabella's eyes, and her resolve hardened. A butler led her through a cavernous foyer with a soaring ceiling and marble floors to a sun-drenched terrace where the luncheon was being held. About 20 guests, all impeccably dressed and radiating wealth, were mingling around small linen-draped tables. Adrian, looking less severe in a pair of tailored slacks and a crisp open-collared shirt, was in conversation with a stern-looking older man. Victoria was there, of course, holding court with a group of women, but she deliberately ignored Mia's arrival. Then Mia saw her. Isabella was sitting slightly apart from the main group, looking beautiful in a lavender dress, but with that same familiar air of isolation about her. When she spotted Mia, her entire face lit up. She stood and walked quickly to Mia, taking both of her hands. "You came." Isabella signed her relief and happiness palpable. "I was so afraid you wouldn't." "I said I would," Mia signed back, smiling. "This is a beautiful home." The transformation in Isabella was remarkable. With Mia by her side, she was no longer a passive observer. She was an active participant. She guided Mia through the guests, introducing her not as an interpreter, but as my new friend Amelia. With Mia translating, Isabella engaged in conversations she would normally have been excluded from. She offered sharp opinions on art, shared witty anecdotes from her youth, and discussed her passion for gardening. The guests were astonished. They were seeing a side of the Davenport matriarch they never knew existed, a vibrant, intelligent, and funny woman who had been hidden in plain sight. Adrian watched from a distance, a strange expression on his face. He saw his mother laughing, her hands flying as she told a story, her eyes sparkling with life. He was seeing the woman his father had fallen in love with, the mother he vaguely remembered from early childhood, before the fever had stolen her hearing. A profound, aching guilt settled in his chest. He had been so focused on protecting her, on managing her disability, that he had ended up imprisoning her. Later, as the guests were enjoying dessert, Isabella led Mia away from the party and into a magnificent, sun-filled library. The walls were lined with thousands of leather-bound books, and the air smelled of old paper and lemon polish. "This was my husband's favorite room," Isabella said, her voice soft and slightly uneven from disuse. She often spoke and signed at the same time, with Mia practicing. "He would spend hours in here." She led Mia to a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was of a younger, smiling Adrian standing beside a kind-faced man with laugh lines around his eyes, Adrian's father, who had passed away 5 years prior. He always wanted the best for Adrian. Isabella signed a sad smile, touching her lips. "And for me. He never learned to sign well, but he tried. He always tried to find new ways to bridge the silence." Her eyes then fell upon a series of technical journals and blueprints under a glass case. He was fascinated by technology, especially assistive technology. Before he died, he was in talks to acquire a small, brilliant research company. He believed their work was revolutionary. What was the company? Mia asked, her curiosity piqued. It was called Echo Bridge Technologies, Isabella signed. Mia felt the blood drain from her face. Her breath hitched, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Echo Bridge Technologies. It couldn't be. What is it, my dear? Isabella asked, her spoken words full of concern, noticing Mia's sudden pallor. Echo Bridge, Mia whispered, her voice trembling. My father. He founded that company. Dr. Robert Rossi. Isabella stared at her, her jaw dropping in astonishment. The nameplate under the glass case, previously unnoticed by Mia, suddenly came into sharp focus. Early schematics for an advanced neural cochlear interface, courtesy of Dr. R. Rossi. At that exact moment, Adrian walked into the library, his phone to his ear. I don't care what their board says. He was saying, his voice hard as steel. The intellectual property from their founder is the key. Find out everything you can about Robert Rossi. Davenport Industries is acquiring Echo Bridge, and that's final. He hung up and looked up, his eyes meeting Mia's. He saw her pale face, her shocked expression, and the dawning, impossible realization in Isabella's eyes as she looked between the photograph, the blueprints, and the young woman standing before her. The past and present had just collided with the force of a thunderclap right in the heart of the Davenport Library. The silence in the Grand Library was heavier than any Mia had ever experienced. It was a vacuum pulling all the air from her lungs. Adrian stood frozen, his phone still in his hand, the words he'd just spoken hanging in the air like a death sentence. Your father, Adrian began, taking a step forward. Your father was Robert Rossi, the founder of Echo Bridge. Maya could only nod her throat too tight to form words. She pointed a trembling finger at the glass case. That was his life's work. He poured everything into it. Isabella, understanding the gravity of the situation, through their expressions, moved to Mia's side, placing a comforting hand on her arm. Tell me, she signed, her eyes full of gentle urgency. And so, the story tumbled out of Mia. She spoke of her father, a brilliant but unbusiness-savvy scientist who dreamed of creating technology that would allow people like his wife to experience sound not as a perfect imitation, but as a rich, nuanced tapestry. He started Echo Bridge in their garage, funded by second mortgages and countless maxed-out credit cards. He had a partner, Mia explained, her voice gaining strength as she found her footing. A man named Martin Webb. My father trusted him completely. He handled the business side of things. But after Mia's parents died in a tragic car accident when she was 19, everything changed. Martin Webb, the executor of her father's will, had come to her with stacks of paperwork. He told her the company was deeply in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy. He claimed the intellectual property was nearly worthless without her father to continue the research. Grief-stricken and overwhelmed 19-year-old Mia had signed everything he put in front of her, believing she was settling her father's affairs. Webb gave her a check for a paltry $5,000, calling it a compassionate gesture, and took control of the company. He stole it, Mia said, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. For years I've been struggling to pay off phantom debts he told me my parents left. He told me their legacy was a failure. But he kept the company. He kept my father's work. Adrian's face was grim. He strode over to his desk and opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Martin Webb is still the CEO, he said, his voice low and laced with fury. He's the one who has been stonewalling our acquisition offer for months, demanding an exorbitant price. It all clicked into place. Webb knew the true value of Dr. Rossi's research, the very research Adrian's father had recognized years ago. He had stolen a legacy and was now trying to ransom it for a fortune. Adrian was trying to buy back the technology that had been stolen from the very woman who stood beside him. "This changes everything," Adrian said, looking at Mia with a newfound intensity. "He didn't just defraud a company, he defrauded you. You are the rightful heir to Robert Rossi's work. His shares, his patents, they should be yours." A spark of hope, something Mia hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, ignited within her. Could it be possible? Could she reclaim the one thing her father had left behind? But how? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I signed papers. I have no money for lawyers to fight a man like that." "You don't need money," Adrian stated, his grey eyes locking with hers. "You have me, and you have the truth. Davenport Industries' legal team is one of the best in the world. We were already investigating Webb for potential patent fraud. Your testimony, your story, this is the key." Just then, Victoria Harrington appeared in the library doorway, a champagne flute in her hand. "Adrian, darling, you've abandoned your guests, and you're monopolizing her." Her eyes flicked dismissively over Mia. "Victoria, now is not the time," Adrian said, his voice sharp. "Isn't it?" she purred, gliding into the room. "I just had a fascinating chat with Mr. Dubois from Aria. He told me all about his little waitress, how she lives in a rundown apartment in the worst part of town, struggling to make ends meet. It's all very pathetic." She took a sip of champagne, her eyes glinting with malice. "You have to be careful, Adrian. People like that are desperate. They see an opportunity like you, and they'll say anything, invent any story to get their claws in." Isabella stepped forward, her expression thunderous. She signed with such speed and ferocity that her hands were a blur. Mia didn't need to translate the raw fury, but she gave voice to the words. "Mrs. Davenport says that character is not measured by wealth, but by kindness and integrity, qualities you seem to know nothing about." Victoria merely laughed, a tinkling, ugly sound. "Oh, how quaint. Adrian, be sensible. You're about to upend a $30 million acquisition based on the sob story of a coffee pourer. This coffee pourer is the daughter of the man whose genius this entire acquisition is built on." Adrian shot back, his voice cold as ice. "And she is going to help me destroy the man who has been trying to swindle us. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have important matters to discuss." He turned his back on her, a clear and final dismissal. Victoria's face contorted in a mask of pure rage. The socialite had lost her prize, and she knew it. With a venomous glare at Mia, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the library and out of the Davenports' lives. In the quiet that followed the three of them, the CEO, the matriarch, and the waitress stood united. A battle was coming, but for the first time, they were all speaking the same language. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Adrian was true to his word. The formidable legal machine of Davenport Industries was mobilized with Mia at its center. She was whisked from her life of balancing trays and counting tips into a world of polished boardrooms, intense legal briefings and strategy sessions that ran late into the night. At first it was overwhelming. A team of sharp-suited lawyers led by a formidable woman named Clara Stein questioned her for hours, dissecting every memory she had of her father, of Martin Webb, and of the days following her parents' deaths. They were relentless, but not unkind. They treated her with a respect she hadn't experienced in years. Adrian was a constant presence. He was no longer the arrogant CEO from the restaurant, but a focused, driven ally. He sat in on every meeting, his sharp mind catching details others missed. He made sure Mia was comfortable, that she understood the complex legal jargon, and that her voice was heard. During breaks, he would bring her coffee and ask about her brother, listening with genuine interest. Mia began to see the man behind the intimidating facade, a man burdened by legacy, fiercely protective of his family, and possessed of a deep, if buried sense of justice. Their most crucial task was finding proof. Webb was a slippery operator. He had covered his tracks well. The documents Mia had signed were legally binding on the surface. They needed to prove fraudulent inducement, that Webb had intentionally lied to her to get her to sign away her inheritance. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, Isabella. While Mia and the legal team were searching for a paper trail, Isabella was on a different mission. She recalled her husband speaking of her father with immense admiration. He kept meticulous notes. She signed to Mia one evening as they sat in the library. My husband said he was old-fashioned. He didn't trust computers for his most important ideas. He kept paper journals. A memory sparked in Mia's mind. A dusty, forgotten box in the back of her cramped storage locker. It was filled with her parents' personal effects, things she hadn't been able to bring herself to sort through since their deaths. The next morning, Adrian drove her to the storage facility himself. In his expensive suit, he looked entirely out of place in the grim concrete building, but he rolled up his sleeves and helped her pry open the lid of a large wooden chest. Inside, beneath old photographs and her mother's favorite scarves, were 3 thick, leather-bound journals. They were filled with her father's elegant looping script complex diagrams and mathematical formulas that were like a foreign language to Mia. But on the last few pages of the final journal, he had written about his partnership with Martin Webb. He wrote of his growing unease of funds that couldn't be accounted for, and of Webb's insistence on creating a complex corporate structure that he didn't understand. The final entry, dated 2 days before his death, was chilling. Martin is pressuring me to sign over patent control to a holding company he created. He says it's for tax purposes, but something feels deeply wrong. He doesn't know that I've kept a private record of all our primary research and funding agreements. I'll keep them at home. A bit of insurance. I trust him, but in this world, a little caution is never a bad thing. It was the smoking gun. He had a private record, a second set of books. The hunt was on. Adrian hired a private investigator who discovered that Webb owned a second unlisted property, a remote cabin upstate. Armed with the journal entry as preliminary evidence, the Davenport legal team secured a warrant. The confrontation was set for the following week during the final acquisition meeting at the Davenport Industries headquarters. Martin Webb arrived smug and confident, expecting to walk away with a $30 million check. He was a portly man with a practiced, oily smile and eyes that never quite met yours. He walked into the main boardroom to find not just Adrian and his executives, but Maya Isabella and the entire legal team. His smile faltered. "Mr. Davenport, what is the meaning of this?" "Our agreement was for a private meeting," Webb blustered. "Our plans have changed, Martin." Adrian said, his voice dangerously calm. He gestured towards Mia. "I believe you're acquainted with Amelia Rossi." Webb paled. "The girl. What does she have to do with this? Everything?" Mia said, her voice shaking but clear. "You told me my father's company was worthless. You told me he left nothing but debt." "I was being kind, my dear." Webb sneered, recovering his composure. "Saving you from the messy details of bankruptcy." "You were a predator." Adrian cut in his voice like cracking ice. "You preyed on a grieving young woman to steal her father's life's work, a legacy that my own father valued at millions even then." Clara Stein stepped forward and placed a thick file on the polished mahogany table. "Mr. Webb, we have Dr. Rossi's personal journals, which detail your fraudulent activities. And this morning, investigators searched your cabin upstate. They found a safe containing the original partnership agreements and financial records for EchoBridge Records, which show the company was highly profitable at the time of Dr. Rossi's death, and that you systematically diverted funds into your personal accounts. She slid a photograph across the table. It showed the contents of the safe, the damning documents laid out for the camera. Martin Webb stared at the photo, and every last drop of color drained from his face. He slumped into his chair, a broken man. The smugness, the confidence, the arrogance, it all evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, cornered thief. "The acquisition is off," Adrian announced to the room. "Instead, Davenport Industries will be financing Ms. Rossi in a lawsuit to reclaim her rightful ownership of EchoBridge Technologies. Our initial offer of $30 million will now serve as the baseline for punitive damages. You will be hearing from us. Security will see you out." As two guards escorted the speechless, trembling Webb from the room, Mia felt a wave of dizziness. It was over. The lie that had defined her adult life had been shattered. Isabella came to her side and wrapped her in a warm hug. "Your father would be so proud of you," she signed, her eyes shining. Mia looked across the room at Adrian. He was watching her, and for the first time, she saw a genuine, unguarded smile on his face. It transformed his severe features, making him look younger, more approachable. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire CEO. He was just a man who had helped right a terrible wrong. And Mia knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this was just the beginning. The transition from a life of quiet servitude to one of immense power was not a single event, but a series of seismic shocks that reshaped Mia's existence. The first of these occurred in the very same Davenport Industries boardroom where Martin Webb had been dismantled. The expansive mahogany table was now cleared, save for a single thick stack of documents. At the head of the table sat Mia, a pen in her hand. Flanking her were Adrian and Clara Stein, while Isabella watched from a nearby armchair, her expression one of serene pride. This was the official signing, the legal transfer of EchoBridge Technologies from Webb's disgraced hands back to the Rossi legacy. As Mia's pen hovered over the signature line, a flood of images washed over her. Her father in his garage workshop, his face lit with passion as he tinkered with circuits. Her mother patiently helping her form her first signed words. The mountain of bills on her tiny kitchen table. The condescending sneer on Victoria Harrington's face. Each memory was a stone on the path that had led her here. Her hand trembled slightly. Adrian, noticing, placed his hand gently over hers. It wasn't a gesture of control, but of quiet solidarity. "Your father's name is on the patents, Mia," he said softly. "But the company's future, that will have your name on it. This is your legacy now." Taking a deep breath, she pressed the pen to the paper and signed Amelia Rossi in firm, clear script. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek, a tear not of sadness, but of profound, cleansing release. The weight of years of struggle of a stolen birthright lifted from her shoulders. In its place settled a new feeling purpose. Walking into the EchoBridge headquarters as its new owner was another surreal experience. The building was cold and sterile, a reflection of Martin Webb's personality. The employees moved with a nervous, uncertain energy. Mia's first act was not to call a board meeting, but to seek out the company's archives. There she found the names of the original research team, the brilliant minds her father had worked alongside, all of whom Webb had systematically fired and replaced with corporate yes-men. She spent the next week tracking them down. She met them not in an office, but in a small, quiet coffee shop. They were older now, grey-haired and lined with the disappointment of a dream deferred. When she introduced herself and told them her plan to restore her father's original vision for the company, their cautious exteriors crumbled. They wept. They shared stories of Dr. Rossi's genius and kindness, and they unanimously agreed to return. For the first time, Mia felt the true presence of her father, not as a ghost of the past, but as a living inspiration for the future. The official relaunch of the company was marked by the launch of the Rossi Foundation. Mia insisted the event be held not in a stuffy ballroom, but in the sunlit atrium of the local science museum. The guest list was a mix of tech industry titans, members of the deaf community, and the staff from ARIA, whom Mia had personally invited. Standing at a podium with Adrian watching from the front row, and Isabella, the guest of honor, beaming, Mia addressed the crowd. "For a long time, my world was very quiet," she began speaking, and signing simultaneously, her hands moving with an effortless grace. "Not because I couldn't hear, but because I didn't think anyone was listening. My father, Dr. Robert Rossi, dedicated his life to building bridges across that silence. Not just with technology, but with understanding. She spoke of her vision for a company that measured success, not in stock prices, but in lives changed. The applause was deafening, a wave of sound and vibrating energy that she felt in her very bones. Her relationship with the Davenports became the bedrock of her new life. Adrian was her mentor in the cutthroat world of business, but he was also her student. Many evenings after long days at the office, they would sit in the Davenport library, and Isabella would teach her son the language of her heart. Adrian was a surprisingly dedicated pupil. He struggled with the fluid grammar of ASL, his large, capable hands often fumbling the more delicate signs. But he never gave up. He wanted to understand, to connect with his mother and with Mia on their terms. It was in these quiet moments, watching him concentrate with a fierce intensity on signing, "How was your day?" to his mother, that Mia felt her heart stir in a way that was both terrifying and wonderful. Their late-night work sessions became more frequent. Surrounded by her father's old blueprints and new innovative designs, they would talk for hours. One night, over cold pizza and coffee, Adrian finally opened up about his father. "He was a great man, a giant," Adrian confessed, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "But I always felt like I was living in his shadow. After he died, the pressure to be him, to be better than him, was immense. I thought being ruthless was the same as being strong. I pushed everyone away, especially my mother. I saw her deafness as a weakness I had to manage, because I was terrified of showing any weakness myself." He looked at Mia, his grey eyes stripped of all their usual defences. "You didn't just give my mother her voice back, Mia. You showed me how to listen. You made me stronger by teaching me it's okay to be vulnerable." This confession was a turning point. It was the final piece of the puzzle of the man Adrian Davenport was. A few weeks later, he found her on the terrace of the estate, sketching in a notebook, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gardens. She was designing a playground accessible for both hearing and deaf children. He approached her quietly. She looked up, and her smile was as warm as the evening light. After a moment of comfortable silence, he took a breath and raised his hands. Slowly, deliberately, he began to sign his movements, more confident, now filled with an emotion he could no longer contain. "You have a beautiful heart, Amelia Rossi. You have shown me what a true legacy is. It is not what we build, but who we love." Mia's breath caught. His signing was no longer just a tool for communication. It was poetry. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the golden sunset. She raised her own hands, her heart feeling so full it might burst. "You do too, Adrian Davenport. You just needed someone to help you hear it." He smiled a real warm smile that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. He reached out not as a CEO or a billionaire, but as a man who had finally found his way home and gently took her hand. It was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new one. Together they would build more than a company. They would build a future, a world of their own making, where every voice, spoken or signed, had a place, and where the language of the heart was the only one that truly mattered. In a world that so often measures a person's worth by their bank account or their social standing, it's easy to forget the power of simple human connection. Mia's story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths can be hidden in what others perceive as our weaknesses or our humble circumstances. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a keeper of a beautiful language, the heir to a brilliant legacy, and the catalyst for profound change. She didn't just serve a meal. She served a lesson in empathy that transformed a family and righted a terrible wrong. Her journey shows us that true wealth lies not in what we own, but in our capacity to see, to hear, and to understand one another. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every story matters, and we have many more to share with you. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.